Hello, treatment-free beekeepers. I'm back with another episode. Before I get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about what's been going on lately. I've had a few questions about the sort of dearth of episodes that I've had lately, and let me just explain that to you really quick. As all of you know, I've spent a bit of time moving around a lot the last 6 years or so, and in doing that, it was really difficult to keep up with beekeeping, and to be totally honest, there was a number of times where I actually thought about quitting, but I decided it would be best to wait and see how it all turned out. And it was a good thing I did that, because now I've now got my own place and I have the bees out in the backyard, and as I'm speaking right now, I can look out the window to my right and see them in the backyard. And having the bees close where I actually want to work with them and have fun with them is, it's a whole lot better. And I've been having a lot of fun actually keeping bees. And as you all know, my catchphrase, have fun keeping bees, that's really something I take seriously. And for a while there, I wasn't having a lot of fun keeping bees, especially this last year when I had tried to get started again here at my new property, and then I promptly broke my back. So, the last couple of months, maybe even a little longer, I've been less interested in beekeeping, and I've been less interested in podcasting. There wasn't really anybody that I wanted to talk to all that much. But here I am again, and I'm having fun again, and I'm back into it again. And so I just wanted to let you guys know what was going on, and hopefully, I'm sure those of you listening to this episode a few months or years down the road, it won't really matter that much because it'll just be back catalog. But for those of you, especially the supporters, thank you for sticking in with me. I've still been keeping up on the Facebook page and doing all that work for you guys, and still have more videos coming. Everything's working. I've just been slowed down for a while. So here we go. We've got another episode. This is Rene. He's located in North Georgia, and he is a Layens beekeeper who was mentored by Don the Fat Bee Man. And as you all know, probably if you've listened, I really like Layens Hives. I just haven't had the opportunity to build any of my own yet. So if you're interested in treatment-free beekeeping in general, and especially in making your own hives and getting things running with a minimum amount of energy, and or you want to keep bees more naturally than the commercial beekeepers do, check this out. It's a pretty good episode. We had a really great conversation, and here it is for you. Gene, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, let's start where we usually start. And why don't you tell me about your beekeeping experience? How did you come to do what you're doing now, and where you located, and what are things like there?
Oh, well, I guess you could say it did begin for me at a very early age when my parents took me to an Asian market. This is up in the Buffalo, New York area where I was raised. And I was about 10, like I say, and we went in there, and they had an observation hive that was huge. And I was just enamored with that thing the whole time that we were there. And my mom and dad did all their shopping, and I stood right by that observation beehive the whole time. And I made up my mind I was going to have bees one way or another. Well, fast forward to 2008, and I moved to Georgia, North Georgia. And that's where our family live now. We've been here ever since 99. So we got out of that cold weather in Buffalo and came down to the North Georgia area. It's absolutely beautiful here. It's like the Mecca for beekeeping. I didn't know that at the time when I first moved. But I started to talk to some of my family that had bees. My wife's cousin is a big beekeeper. And I remember asking him, hey, do you got some bees I can have one of these days? He goes, yeah, one of these days I'll get you some. And then her brother, same thing. He keep bees on the side. He say, hey, can I have some of them bees one of these days? Thinking the whole time that, bees is like somebody giving you some goldfish. All you got to do is stick them in a bowl and, feed them every once in a while, or, do whatever. I just thought it'd be cool to have them. So finally, I found an individual that's about an hour north of where I live. You may have heard of him. His name is Don. Don the Fat Bee Man is the guy I'm talking about. He's got a YouTube channel. And so anyway, I reached out to him, and he says, yeah, come on up. He says, I'll show you how to take care of bees. So he was my first mentor. And like I say, this is back in 2008. One of the things that attracted me to his methods, although I probably have, kind of broken away from a lot of what I learned, was that he did not use any chemical treatments like Apistan and Checkmite, anything that would make the wax or honey toxic. So that was a big draw for me, because I knew that was not something I would ever want to do. I'm just, I'm not a big fan of poisons or chemicals or any of that. And so that appealed to me. And so it was the only way that I could learn. I said, okay, let's do this. So I learned everything that I could absorb. And right about the same time that I showed up at Don's bee yard, I Google searched Michael Bush. So I had a lot of questions for Don as far as, well, why don't you do it like this instead? And he said, look, he says, I'm going to show you the way I know how to do it. And from there, you can kind of, do your thing if you want to do something a little different. And so right away, I was just drinking up everything I could from Michael Bush's website about how he uses comb guides. He doesn't use any wax foundation, and how quickly the bees draw their comb without any assistance from, having plastic or even wax imprinted cells. They can do just fine. And so it was a gradual enlightening. So that's when it began. And right up until, oh gosh, I'd probably say this winter, it's been a journey. And that's the thing that keeps me so enthralled with beekeeping, is you just can't learn it all. You can't just read one book and be done. You're always learning something new. And the more hands-on that you do, it seems like you pick up these little subtleties every year and every time you come in contact with the bees. And so they're very stimulating mentally, and I just love it. So that's how it began. I don't know if you want me to elaborate a little further on anything else, but, feel free to fire away.
Well, I'm picking up some topics for discussion as we go. Why don't you continue a little bit to where you are now and what you're doing now? Okay,
so I've ever since being exposed to Michael Bush's kind of mentoring, he's not a personal mentor, but just by exposure to his website, I consider him to be one. I have been on a quest to find a way that's as easy as possible to care for the bees, that is putting them first, that's doing what's ever best for the bee. So I'm very interested in natural everything. That's just kind of my lifestyle. I try to stay away from preservatives and chemicals in my own diet. I don't want to give it to any of my animals, especially my bees. And I'm really fascinated about how bees have been able to live for so long without anyone putting foundation in a tree trunk for them, without anyone coming in and dusting them with sugar powder while they're in their tree trunk, all that stuff. So I said, yeah, that makes so much sense. So this year I just picked up a book. It's called Keeping Bees with a Smile. And if you haven't heard of it, it's on the Horizontal Beehive website. I think that's the name of it. And it was written by a late beekeeper, Russian beekeeper named Fedor Lazutin. I hope I said his name correctly. It is just a phenomenal book. It reminds me a lot of what I learned from Michael Bush. And these are horizontal hives, and they're deep. They're deep horizontal hives. So there's horizontal, and you can do horizontal with like a standard deep Langstroth or even a medium frame. But these are, I should say, extra deep. It's like two deep Langstroth frames put together and then spread them out horizontally. And these hives only require the beekeeper to go in twice a year. That blew my mind. I said, there's no way you can go in just twice a year and get away with that. They're going to swarm on you, or, you're going to have issues going on if you don't check on them, every 10 days or something, especially in a nectar flow. So I won't go into all the details of the book, but I went ahead and built a few of these hives myself. And I'm very pleased with the results I'm getting. And I'm starting to shoot some videos, post those on my YouTube channel, Enjoy Beekeeping. And I am just blown away by how easy they are. I captured a swarm. I had a phone call, and it was March 2nd. A guy called me out in the Stone Mountain area, which is about 45 minutes south of where I live. And he had a big swarm on his fence in his backyard. It was half on his fence and half on his garbage can. And it was a big swarm. It's probably a 4-pounder. And I said, okay, I just got the hive body built. I don't even have a cover for it. I said, I'll come over and I'll get them. And I put them in that Layens style hive, that horizontal deep that I was telling you about, and shook them in there because they were just, waist high. And they've been in there ever since. And I've only peeked under the hood just out of curiosity to see how they're doing. And they are just kicking butt in there. They're drawing their frames nice and straight, because I only give them a little bit of wax starter strip, literally a half an inch. That's all I do, is give them a little half inch of small cell wax. And I pinch that in between the cleat bar, and they're drawn straight as an arrow. And it's a 20 frame configuration. So 20 frames horizontally. The last I checked was 2 weeks ago. They are filled out on almost 16 of those frames. So I'm looking forward to a little bit of honey off of these guys here. They might even have it for me now.
Outstanding. So this definitely, we're talking about the Layens Hive.
This is the Layens Hive. And, so many people use Langstroth equipment. And I'm thinking to myself, as I'm building the Layens Hive, I don't want to be fighting against the current. So just for fun, I'm going to build a horizontal hive that's extra deep, just like the Layens Hive, but also wide enough to accommodate a Langstroth frame. So I went and built a few of those. And so I'm running the two simultaneously. And because I'm a foundationless beekeeper, I'm curious to see how well the bees are going to draw in both of those. The Layens Hive frames are slightly narrower than a Langstroth frame, probably about 3 inches narrower. So it's a little bit easier to get a nice straight run of comb on that. My concern about the Langstroth configuration is they might start to cross comb or something. So I'm trying to keep an eye on that. But I'm watching it, and so far so good.
Yeah, I had Leo Shareshkin on the show a few years ago, so we are familiar with the Layens Hive, and I've wanted to try it for quite some time, but I've just got so much Langstroth equipment built up. I just don't have any need to be trying any new hive styles right now. So you were talking a little bit earlier about Don being your mentor. I'm familiar with Don. I actually bought some 2008. In fact, I bought some nukes from him.
Okay.
And the thing that he really did for me was get me started in small cell, because he all of his stuff is small cell.
Right.
And he sells nukes in small cell. And I had started packages on small cell, but they'd had, over the years had difficulty getting it drawn well and pretty. And once I had that start of good drawn comb from him, then from then on, I was able to seed that into the rest of the hives and have had pretty much no problems getting the comb drawn straight since then. And probably some of that has to do with better experience and more skill in getting it done also. But
yeah,
it's very interesting to hear what you said about you researching and coming up with ideas and taking them to him and him saying, well, I'm just going to tell you how I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the model that I have talked about quite a bit in the last year or two. And the way that I put it is, I want, when a person's learning to do beekeeping, I want them to find a source that they can learn from and basically copy, so that they can get the basics down, get the fundamentals down. And then once they get some experience under their belt, they can move forward and innovate and make their own ideas. Because before you know how to break the rules properly, you just really don't know what you're doing, and you don't know how to decide what to do because you don't have that foundation to work from.
Yeah, you're right. And so my first year, let's see, so Don actually showed me how to make my first beehive. I'll never forget that, running on a table saw. It was the first time I really got to put a table saw to use, and so I went out and bought one after I had my lesson with him. I'll never forget bringing that hive body home. And yes, the small cell that you bring up was one of the first things I learned, and I'm so grateful for that. Because, sometimes you'll learn something, and then you'll find out that there's a better way later on, and you have to deprogram all that out of your head. So I was fortunate enough at least to get a good start as far as clean wax that's not laden with chemicals. I was able to start with small cell bees right off the get-go, or more natural size bees. And I've been doing the foundationless method right from day one. It was kind of out of necessity for me, because as you know, beekeeping can be a very expensive hobby for some. It just depends. It's kind of like remodeling your kitchen. When you ask someone, what does it cost to remodel my kitchen? Well, how much money do you have? So it can be a cheap remodel, or it can be a very extensive one. And the same, I tell people with bees, you don't have to break the bank if you're willing to do some things, yourself, like build your own boxes. But it's also less expensive if you let your bees draw their own comb. Wax just keeps going up higher and higher. I haven't checked the prices lately just because I don't usually look, but I hear through the grapevine that it's going up quite a bit. And just knowing that every year it gets more saturated with some type of chemical makes me all the more happy that I'm not using it. So that was, kind of one of the necessities that I had. And it's funny, when I go after something, I'm kind of one of those go big or go home guys. My wife will tell you, she has some stories that she could give you. But so when I started my bees, Don says, it's not like the goldfish that you thought they were. You're not going to take them home and just sprinkle little goldfish food on them or bee food every so often, and you're going to have them forever. I had no idea that they lived 6 weeks in prime, honey flow time. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. These things are going to be dead. How am I going to keep them going? And he says, well, you take care of them, and that queen will keep laying. You give her room to do her job, and they'll keep going. So early on, Don told me, he says, if you just take home one hive, that's okay. But if you could do more than one, you're going to learn a lot more. So I'm like, okay, well, let me see what I can scrape up. And I got some money to get a couple more packages. So I started off with 3. And I'm glad that I did that because right away you can start to see what a weak hive looks like versus a robust colony. Mm-hmm. And that's key, I think, in the beginning for a new beekeeper. If you can start with more than one, 3 is a good number if you can swing it.
I absolutely totally agree. I think 5 is even better than 3, but that becomes a little harder to swing. Right.
And just to kind of fill you in now, as this journey for me continued, I was just hooked. I absolutely loved this right from day one. And I swear, even right now as we speak, I am just as thrilled today as I was that first day when I brought home my packages. There's just something about them. And then in order for me to continue this, as you know, there is an expense. And I remember, at the time, we had 3 young children growing up. And so you have to be careful how much money you spend on certain things, including pleasures. And this was purely a pleasure for me. And so, I didn't want to be a selfish father or anything. Say, well, kids, sorry, you can't have toys this year. I'm going to buy some bee equipment and an extractor or whatever. So what I had started to do was I kind of stayed connected with Don for a little bit because he suggested what I could do to make money is raise nukes. And so he said, you could buy a package, you could raise nukes. And of course, Don showed me how to, stimulate them with sugar. So that's exactly what I would go and do. I'd get some packages, I'd stimulate them with sugar in late February and, build them up. Now, I don't do any of that anymore. I've kind of, like I say, kind of peeled away from a lot of that stuff that I used to do. But the one good thing about raising nukes, and I still do that now, a very limited number, is it gave me a lot of hands-on with a lot of bee colonies. And because I was selling the nukes, and even if I just break even and not make any money, I wasn't spending money that we didn't have. And that helped me to continue this love that I have for keeping bees. So I would recommend that if you're able to do that, if you've got, a little bit of room to do it, get yourself going and raise some nukes for yourself, build some boxes, raise some nukes. And if you can learn how to do it in a more sustainable fashion, much like what I'm doing now, because I'll fill you in on that too. That's a great way to get a lot of experience.
Another outstanding idea. I couldn't agree more. I'm always wanting to push new beekeepers into raising their own nukes and queens and making splits and things, because I think those are skills that are far more valuable to learn as a new beekeeper than learning how to treat. If you're going to spend your time learning something, you might as well learn how to make more bees and how to get bees for free, so you don't have to worry about buying things in the future when they inevitably die. And they're going to die at some point. Everything dies. But if you know how to make your own bees, if you know where to get them for free, then having them die is not that big a deal anymore. And you can look at it more as kind of a culling of the herd rather than loss of your valuable property.
I know. And that's a big heartbreak, for a beekeeper to, let's say they go out and they get 3 packages. I'm seeing packages upwards of 150, no problem, a 3-pound package. And who knows what you're going to get. You might get some insanely hot bees. You don't know unless you know the source. You're good friends with them or something like that. So you get these things in, you start up your hives, and so you've got, a fairly sizable investment. And if that's all you do is just try to keep those 3 colonies going, you're just going to be fighting to prevent swarm. You're going to, like you say, you're going to have to then try to learn how to keep them from dying. And it seems like that's all you're doing is protecting those 3. And as you said, eventually one or more, something's going to come along, especially for a new beekeeper. Hive beetles wiped out some of my early colonies. Wasn't ready for that one. I didn't see that one coming. So having these nukes, you have the culling of the herd. You learn how to split the hive properly without making it too weak. And boy, I tell you what, in a honey flow, those bees will sure forgive a lot of your mistakes.
That's true. Timing is part of it.
Yeah.
So speaking of timing, you'd mentioned some subtleties in beekeeping a little earlier. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
So let me think here that I could give you for subtleties. Okay. Well, so for me, one of the subtleties of beekeeping, one of the first ones was that the bees can build their comb without your help. In fact, they can build it in places where you would not expect them to build comb. So that was I guess you could say a subtlety, because so many beekeepers feel that they cannot start beekeeping unless they come home with those boxes, brand new painted white, with the frames, with the plastic foundation already in them. And then they can begin their journey on beekeeping. And that's not true at all. But some of the other things that I've been more in tune with now is it's odd how I no longer cut my grass as much as I used to because I am become so in tune with the fact that the bees need those flowers. So if you see clover growing on your grass, my family knows not to run over that grass with the lawnmower. They're all pretty good. My wife tends to kind of like that picture perfect golf course looking grass. And I've become kind of like a hippie. I don't like to cut the grass. And until those clovers turn brown, I said, then you can cut that grass if you want to. It'll be fine. I'll trim it up nice and edge it and everything for you. But until the bees are done with it, can we please let it go? That's an area that I've people laugh at me about. I'm trying to think some of the new ones that I've picked up. So the bees, and I learned this from Michael Bush now. Let's say you go into a hive, you make a split, and they'll make some queen cells, and as an emergency procedure, they'll raise up maybe 6 of them, and then sometimes they'll go out and swarm and come back, and you'll think that queen isn't laying. And in fact, I just checked on one today. I went out there, and it was a newly hatched queen. It's probably been, she's probably been in that box now 5 days walking around, and I didn't see any eggs. But Michael said, just let the bees take care of themselves. Give them a little more time. Don't rush them. And I had a hive that was just kind of poking along. I thought, I don't know if I'm going to get squish that queen and just put a new one in there. And I came out, I think I left them alone for about almost 3 weeks. And I came out, and they're one of the best colonies I got out there. I think the day I put the lid on that box, that queen must have went on some kind of turbocharge, and she just laid that thing up like crazy. And I went out there to check on them, and they are probably one of the best nukes that I've got. They'll probably turn into a production colony quicker than all the rest.
Awesome. So what's your weather like this time of year?
It is absolutely gorgeous. We are in a very strong flow, and temperatures today are mid to high 80s. And there's just no way to find any fault in the weather here. It is just absolutely beautiful. We did have a rough start to the year. We had a very late spring for North Georgia. For us, it actually starts to warm up in late February, and you'll start to see the bees bringing in pollen right in late February. And we just had so much rain in March. I mean, it felt like it rained every day. I don't think it did, but it felt like it did. And that put our bees behind quite a bit. But come April and May, it's just been absolutely phenomenal. And the bees are just in full mode of bringing in nectar, and they are making honey like crazy. And I know we're in a strong flow right now because I did a cutout on Thursday, and I had a lot of honeycomb that I brought home with me, and I was putting that into frames to give back to the bees. And I was working outside, probably about 50 feet from my apiary, and there wasn't maybe more than 2 bees on that table licking up that honey. And if I try that a month from now, I don't even think I could be outside with that honey.
Yep, that's another one of those subtleties, noticing when the bees are collecting nectar, knowing when's bad times to work in the hive during dearths and stuff, so that you don't have excess robbing. Those some things that I think of. I'm very much into the subtleties and the intuition of beekeeping, because there's things that you'll learn over time as a beekeeper. And I can kind of tell you what some of them are, but I couldn't even tell you how to know. Like when I open a hive, and I can just kind of tell from looking at the bees and the combs and stuff without looking closely, I can tell how the hive is doing, whether it's queenless, whether they're bringing in nectar or not. Right now, it's a good way. I've got a bunch of small nukes, the queens have just finished mating, and they've begun laying, probably been laying for 5 or 6 days. And so I can tell by looking at the front of those nukes which ones are probably queen right and which ones might not be by the amount of pollen that they're bringing in. And are they bringing in full pollen baskets, or are they bringing in half pollen baskets?
Yeah. That is true. And that's something that only a few years or more under your belt is going to give you, is exactly what you just said. You can look at the outside of a hive, and man, I'll tell you what, you can almost, judge it right from the amount of traffic going in. And then when you take the lid off, like you say, just the fact that if the bees are runny, or if they're calm, if they start humming real loud, you start to see and feel and hear the calmness or excitement or the agitation within seconds.
A couple days ago, I was looking at a swarm that I just caught about a week ago. I don't remember exactly when I caught it. And so I was opening the box, and I was going to put them, move them from a 5-frame box into a 10-frame box. And I opened the box, and they had that nice solid hum, like everything's working right, good hum. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, probably 30 seconds after I opened the top of the box, and I hadn't touched anything yet. I was preparing everything and figuring out what I needed to do. And all of a sudden, the entire hive just went silent. That was an interesting sort of happening that I don't hear often.
Okay. No, well, here's something that I learned this year. Man, I'll tell you what, Solomon, I am not the fastest learner at anything, including beekeeping. But here, sorry, I'll just give you this one here. I had a swarm in my plum tree. This seems to be one of their favorite places to go. I guess it's just the closest tree that they can jump onto. And I catch more bees than I can eat plums off of this thing. But I always, I'll see that swarm out there, and I'll put my tarp down. And when I used to shake a swarm, I would try to get that box. I would hold it with one hand and with the lid off, and then I would take my other hand and try to grab the branch and bounce it in there, hoping that I got the queen in. So I don't know, maybe I'm a slow learner about this, but you don't have to get the queen in to that box for the whole rest of the colony to go in. I think there's a little bit of, herd mentality. When the bees begin to march in. If she's in that pile of bees that are marching in, she'll march in with them.
Yep.
So that was new for me. I was, wow, man, am I the only guy that's seen this happen? I can't be. I'm probably just a late learner. So sounds like you've already experienced that.
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of fun things happen.
Yeah.
Bees don't read books. They don't follow rules necessarily. One of the new things that I've seen, I hadn't even heard of before. Maybe I just missed it. But that swarm that I caught a week ago was a double swarm. So it was hanging up on a branch about, I'm going to say 10 feet up. And I put an 8-foot ladder underneath and a 5-frame nuke box on top of the ladder, and I carefully climbed up there as far as I could get to and kind of bent the branch over and gave it a shake and dumped all the bees into the box. And normally they pretty quickly will march into the box, like you say.
Yeah.
However, about half of the swarm decided that they were going to stay on the side of the hive. And so I start to get curious. I go look at it, and I start to sort of stick my finger in the cluster and look around, and lo and behold, there's a queen. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I'm up here on a ladder. Everything's all up in the air. So I went and got a queen cage, and I grabbed the queen and stuck her in the queen cage. And then immediately, all those bees that were swarming with the second queen marched into the hive with the first queen. So now I have a queen and no hive or no bees.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and found one of the nukes that I had made previously that looked like it was queenless, and I stuck her in there. So hopefully that all works out well. But I had not seen a double personally had not seen a double swarm, but from what I've been seeing on the Facebook group, it's been happening quite a bit this year.
Well, you're in good company. Same thing happened to me. In fact, I had a what I think is a triple, and I thought it was a double at the time because I did the same thing. I shook the bees, and they started marching in, and then a lot of them went right back on that tree again. And I knew the queen went into that box. I did see her go in, and I said, "Why are those bees still on that branch?" They were just being really stubborn. So I started just kind of poking my fingers in there, and there was another queen. So I grabbed my queen clip. I put her in the clip, and I text message a whole bunch of my bee buddies saying, "Hey, I got an extra queen. She might be mated. She might still be virgin, but if anybody wants her, you can have her because, I don't need two queens in this swarm. And all my other hives were queen right. So, I'll just give her away." Well, guy comes, he gets it. And that swarm sat in that tree for a little bit, thinking, I'll just get them at dinner time. And so I had my dinner, come back out there, and there was another queen out there. And so I'm like, what in the world is going on? There's a queen in the box. I gave one queen away, and there's still another one walking around amongst these bees that are still in the tree. So I called up one of my other mentors. His name's John Seaborn of Wolf Creek Apiary up in Tennessee. And John's retired now, but every once in a while I give him a call. I said, "John," I said, "I've been doing this for 12 years. And every time I turn around, well, not every time I turn around, but every so often they'll do something that just blows me away." I say, "Can you tell me what I'm looking at? I got a big swarm out here, and so far I've seen 3 queens in it." He goes, "That's nothing." He says, "I've had up to 7. And I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me." He goes, "Yeah." He says, "What you did is you made a split, and then you had a bunch of queen cells, emergency cells. They all hatched out at once, didn't they?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Yep." So he says, "What you can do," he says, "you can, if you got queen cages, you can get all those queens and then just shake some bees into each box, get 3 different boxes or however many queens you got. And you can start up 3 nukes or 4 nukes or up to 7 nukes," he did one day. So it just blew me away.
Nice. Now that I remember it, if you watch the Skep beekeeping video from Germany, they do a lot of swarm catching, and I think they sell, what they do, they sell the primary swarms, and then they catch a bunch of the secondary swarms, and they take the queens out of them, and then use the bees for bulk hive creation, and then put the queens back in where they want them. So it's kind of interesting. Bees do that for sure. And the splits that I had made here, I've been experimenting with a new method. I'm just calling micro splits, where I take one frame of open brood and then a frame of stores and an empty frame and a couple of shakes of bees in a queen castle. So that's a 3-frame nuke. And I have noticed that they seem to like to swarm. So I don't know if that's a function of perhaps there's too many bees in the box, or it's just something that they're going to do because they have these queens hatching out all at once.
Yeah, and I kind of think the small space, 2-3 frames. Man, I tell you what, you got to be on top of that. Like it's kind of like having a pot on the stove that's at full boil. You just can't go walk away for 5 minutes and check on something else. You got to kind of be right there with them. And that's another thing about beekeeping. Is that, I started to experiment with queen rearing. I'm totally fascinated by it. I think it's a great endeavor for people. It's one of those things that I don't know if I'm cut out for it. Maybe I am. I just got to be more patient or whatever. But I did grafting and I did cell builders, and I'm horrible. I swear I'm probably the worst queen. I really am. I tell you. So I just kind of let the bees do it themselves. If I want queens now, I'll just go into a five frame nuke that's been built up to maybe, 3 boxes tall. So there's a total of 15 frames. I'll split a nuke off of it, make them go queenless. And then 10 days later, I'll just cut out, 6 or 7 cells. And I just kind of do it that way now. And they're the best queens I could ever ask for anyway. So they do it for me now.
Yeah, I really enjoy queen rearing. It does take a little bit of practice once you find a method that works for you. And it's interesting you're talking about with the small nukes like that. I think you're right. I've had, if even with a single queen cell that I put in there that's been grafted, they still will only give you a limited amount of time before they'll swarm. So you've got, but the thing with the micro splits is it seems like they'll swarm before the queen is mated.
Oh gosh.
Whereas with just one queen, they'll wait till they've filled up the box with brood, and then they'll swarm. So a more natural swarm rather than with a walkaway split. It seems like you end up more with like an explosion swarm with a bunch of unmated queens. I could be wrong, but that seems to be what's going on to me.
Yeah. So I'm definitely heading into a new direction this year with my bees. I'm filling up my apiary with those extra deep horizontals. Trying to think off the top of my head how many I got out there. I got about 8. And then I've got roughly 15 nukes that are left out there. So yeah, I'm in the low 20s. I've raised up to 70 or 75 nukes, but that's borderline full-time job. So I kind of, the funny thing about this year with this COVID-19 situation, it's actually made me a better beekeeper, and it's allowed me some more time with my bees. So, I mean, this is definitely a bad situation, but, you know, I'm talking about the silver lining for sure. I've really been happy to have more time with my bees. And I was actually going to just kind of scale back this year and just kind of do it for fun, do it for myself. But with the time that I've had, I've been able to build these extra deep Layens hives. And so I can feel myself gravitating in that direction where I've got a hive that now mimics the environment that they would find inside of a tree trunk, as close as we can get to one anyway. And not that it has to be a tree trunk. They seem to be pretty happy in a lot of places, but you know, when we think of bees in nature, we tend to think of them living in a tree. And this hive really does mimic that. I've built mine out of the 2x12, so it's the thick dimensional lumber, well-insulated roof. And one of the things about the author, Fedor, just referring back to him, before he passed away, he talked about that hive and some modifications that he would do to it if he were to build more. And one of them was he would create about 3 to 6 inches of dead space below the entrance. So the hive would be 3 to 6 inches deeper than what the frames would, you know, come down to. And he said he would fill that with peat moss or some other type of, you know, absorbent material. And so that's what I've done is I went ahead and made that modification to all mine. So I'm trying to mimic the environment that the bees would find in the tree. Now, so far what I'm doing is, as the weather is getting hotter here in Georgia, one of the things I'm watching for is the bearding, because when it gets hot here, it'll go up in the upper 90s, and then you have big beards hanging off of all your hives. I want to see how well they do with the bearding. And then also, too, I believe, now we've had some cold snaps, too. In fact, we had a cold snap here last week. It got down, for us, being cold, was about 40 degrees. So that's kind of cold when you've been about 75 most days and 60 at night. And then when it snaps down to about 40, you know, that's a shock for some of the brood. And if you don't have a decent hive, you can lose some of your brood. Well, these Layens hives with the really thick walls and well-insulated roof, it's nothing for them. They just go inside and they're just waited out and come out and everything's fine. It's like nothing ever happened. So those are some of the observations I've made so far. I've got to go through a winter with them and a spring, early spring with them, just to see how well they winter over. But I'm pretty excited about what I'm learning. And I almost wish this is how I learned how to start beekeeping to begin with, was in this type of configuration, because it doesn't require all the, keeping on top of stacking and supering and checkerboarding and all the other things that go with standard beekeeping, which is very much patterned after commercial beekeeping. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes in for new beekeepers. I don't know if you'd agree on that, but I know for me personally, it just felt like, golly, there's a lot to learn. And I was all for it. But now I'm looking at this, I'm like, it didn't have to be this complicated. This is a lot easier.
I advocate a much lower maintenance style of beekeeping. For instance, you're exactly right. The sort of standard way of doing it is very much patterned after the commercial way of doing it. And so I tell people, if you're not a migratory commercial beekeeper, maybe think about keeping bees differently than a migratory commercial beekeeper. One of the ones that I do, for instance, is I don't remove supers from the hive after harvest. I put them right back on, let the bees clean out the little bit of honey residue that's still in there, and then I leave them on for the rest of the year. And they'll fill it back up a little bit in whatever fall flows come along, and then they'll guard it. And if the hive is healthy, then you have a full hive full of comb that is guarded against wax moths. And then the next spring, you don't have to worry so much about getting supers on in time, because I personally fully believe that by the time that most people put their supers on the hive has already decided to swarm. So you're not going to stop that swarming. Whereas with my really big hives, they almost never swarm, because it seems to me, and I'm anthropomorphizing right here, it seems to me that they already know for that year that they're not going to be able to fill up that hive, and so they don't bother swarming. We think that they go with just a yearly sort of thought process, but I think actually they might go for more of a multi-year thought process. They may be, and again, anthropomorphizing here, they maybe want to fill up that entire hive or get it mostly full before they want to swarm. And if it takes 2 years to do that so that they can have both a healthy swarm and a healthy remaining colony, then that's what they'll do. I could be wrong, but again,
I agree.
This is what I experience.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I'm a big believer in the fact that also that bees, they will begin, they're already planning for winter now. We're in a honey flow, but they're building that colony's nest for winter right now. And exactly as you say, if they've got the space, and man, I'll tell you what, they are smart creatures. They've got a lot of things already figured out, and it's just amazing to me how they instinctively know exactly what needs to be done, and they seem to be very well in tune with how much space they have to work with. And like you say, even, you'll look at them in the spring thinking, oh, okay, I'll put supers on next week. Well, the bees may have already decided there's not enough room in here, and they're already scouted out a new location. And by the time you come back with your supers, you're only going to have, half of your bees left, because they're out of there.
Definitely. So you said you built how many Layens hives so far?
So far, I've got 6, and I've got one next door. I built one for my father-in-law. He loves bees, and he's just getting older. And I trapped a swarm in one of my Layens traps, and I said, hey, I got something for you. So I built him one of those and parked it out front of his garden. He got a kick out of it. So even though they're next door, the drones are still going to mate with my queens. So I get all the benefit of that, and makes me look like a good son-in-law too.
Yeah. So why don't you just kind of go through a general process, because people can find the instructions to build these online for free, I believe.
Yeah.
Why don't you just kind of go through the process of what it is to build one, and especially how easy it is to build one, the hard parts, the easy parts. Mm-hmm. Give people, sort of advocate for, obviously the price is going to be less because you're building it yourself, but give people a good look at what it is to build one and why they should do it themselves rather than dropping $100 or more for a Langstroth hive.
So building the box is fairly simple. Anyone really, I mean, I could have my wife go out and build one. You're literally just building a box. The only critical part is you just got to make sure you've got, your width set properly so you can put a frame on it. But, it's still easy. And I'm not a carpenter by trade. Never was one. In fact, the only real construction that I've done in my life, I learned most of it from building bee boxes of some sort. So the Layens Hive is just a large box. And I'll tell you what, if beekeeping fails, you got yourself a nice little chest that you can keep. The thing is big enough to be a piece of furniture. Just put a nice top on it, and you can have it in your living room. Or the kids can use it for a toy chest or something. So you build this box out of either 2 by 12 dimensional lumber, and you don't want to use pressure treated, just want to use the pine. You want to get something lightweight, because when you put it all together, it's fairly heavy to move. So they'll always tell you the big thing about horizontal hives is they say there's no heavy lifting. Oh, but yeah, except for that one time that you got to put the hive out on the hive stand, you better have help with you. So you build your box, and the most complicated part of the box for me is actually building the roof for it, because it's a quilted. You can use a quilted top, which basically means you just build a top with a 3-inch or 4-inch depth, where you can add cellulose insulation or lamb's wool, which I don't have access to, or you can use cedar shavings, just something that will help slow down the heat loss out the roof. So for me, that took a little bit. It's still not overly complicated. I'm sure a 5th grader could probably build one of these. So moving it is the trickiest part, and putting it out on the hive stand. Now, the good news to that heavy hive is there's a lighter weight version of it that you can build depending on your climate. I almost think you can use a 3/8 inch plywood, 2 pieces of 3-inch plywood sandwiched over top of a 3/4 inch piece of a 1 by pine. And then you can fill that empty space with foam board insulation that's 3/4 inch thick. So you have a much lighter wall, and you just build 4 walls, nail them or screw them together. I always screw my stuff together. And then put a bottom on, and you build your top, and it's a lot lighter. And the R value on the walls, I believe, is actually better than the 2 by 10 and 2 by 12 dimensional lumber. And in Georgia, we can get away with that, no problem. We could get away with 3/4 inch plywood. I built some out of that, because our winters, we might get a snow once a year. That's it. I mean, we're wimps down here. We're, back in Buffalo, we get, 6-7 feet of snow in a couple of days. So you definitely want to build them sturdy up there. But down here, you can build the 3/4 inch plywood. It's a lot lighter. The heat loss, really for me, is going to come out the top of the hive. So I made sure that those tops are really well insulated. And so far, I'm seeing good insulation value, and the fact that I'm not getting heavy bearding yet. I'm still keeping an eye on that, because we're just getting into the upper 80s. So I like the Layens hives. For me, they're no more complicated than building a Langstroth 5, 10, or 8 frame box. And of course, the tops of the Langstroth, telescoping cover is way easier. That's just the way they are. They're just a simple telescoping cover. The Layens I put mine on a hinge, but it only takes just a very basic carpentry skill to make one of these. So thank goodness for that, because if it was any harder, I don't know how I do beekeeping.
Well, awesome. Like I said, I'm definitely want to try them, but I've just got so much empty equipment right now that there's not really a need.
No, I understand that.
Well, is there any question you think I should have asked you that I didn't?
Well, here's something I'll throw out there. I was kind of thinking about this before we did our podcast. So let's say you're a beginner and you really want to get, in deep with the bees, and, you're on a limited budget. So just some of the things that helped me be creative was, think about raising nukes. That's one way that you can generate a little income, and it'll probably be a positive cash flow endeavor for you instead of a negative one. So that's encouraging if you're starting off. The other thing is there's always people giving away free paint. So get yourself some paint if you want to, paint up your boxes. And I found a few creative ways to get lumber. About an hour north of me, there's a furniture builder. And every so often, he'll have a load of lumber that gets a little bit of water damage on it, and they don't want to build any of their furniture with it. And, just look around in the area to see if you've got someone like that, and they'll unload it pretty cheap. I've never been able to get it free from him, but he gives me a really good deal. And I just got a trailer full of lumber last week, and I got enough lumber to build hives probably for a couple years, and it only cost me about I think I paid $130 for a trailer load of lumber, and it's the 3/4-inch pine boards. And that's nice, easy lumber to build with. And I also got some dimensional lumber. And there's another guy that I connected with. He actually, he's one of the carpenters on the movie sets down here in Georgia. And every time they dismantle a movie set, they chuck it all into a dumpster. And so he takes it because he's a beekeeper himself. But he saw one of my ads on Craigslist for nukes one day, and he says, "You ever want to do any trading? I got all kinds of lumber." And so ever since, that was going back probably 10 years now, we've been trading ever since. So look for ways to support your habit and make it, an endeavor that you can do for fun and help other people get started. And then also you'll have a way to, fund your hobby, and you can kind of grow it that way. You can actually grow it into a sideline business.
Yeah. Make it cheaper for yourself. Remember that this is all for your enjoyment, and life isn't just about buying things and having things. I think it's a lot more fun to make things also.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything I want is not available in stores. I either have to buy it or trade for it or build it. But it's funny, you get to a certain point in your life, or if you find something, like the beekeeping, a lot of things are not at Walmart.
So you mentioned the sets and the movie business there. You guys are kind of becoming new Hollywood out there in Georgia.
I hope it doesn't become like California, because I'll tell you what, Georgia is absolutely gorgeous. It reminds me a lot of the area of Western New York where I grew up. So Buffalo is right on the border of Canada. In fact, we were so close living in New York to Canada that it was nothing for us to go there for Chinese food, for lunch or dinner or whenever we wanted to. You didn't need passports or nothing. And we were that close. And the area up in that part of New York is just absolutely gorgeous when the weather finally gets warm. It takes forever, though. So I'm not a big fan of cold weather. And when I moved to Georgia, it's got the rolling hills. It's got the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So now we're way north of us. There's just gorgeous waterfalls everywhere, and you get all four seasons. So when I left New York and I came here, I didn't feel homesick as far as, the landscape goes. It reminded me of all the beauty that we had in New York, but we had a much nicer summer, a very mild winter, which is great. It's a little bit hot and humid, though, I will admit, in a summertime, man, it'll beat you up. But for beekeeping, it's a perfect place to do beekeeping. And like I said, I didn't know that moving down here at the time, that it was such a great spot for it, but I'm happy to be here. And I'm also a big believer in working with the bees that are local to your area. A lot of beekeepers, they'll buy their bees from Georgia, and sadly, they sugar water them to death, and they'll ship out these cheap packages and cheap nukes, and they may not be very well adapted to your area. So I don't raise mine on sugar. It's just as an emergency only, and it's usually dry sugar. I haven't given anyone a drop of sugar in my bee yard this year. They know better than to look at me for sugar. Well, anyway, this has been a great experience for me. And beekeeping, the thing that my goal is to help other people get started beekeeping, and to find the absolute pure joy that comes from it. And this is something that I want, once a person starts, I want it to be a lifelong thing for them. I want them to have bees their entire life after this. I don't want it to be, just a frustrating experience for them. I want them to really enjoy beekeeping. And that's why, I named my website Enjoy Beekeeping and my YouTube channel that, because that's my core. I want people to find that same joy that I've been able to have with my bees, but I want to help them to shorten the learning curve. So, I'm still on that journey. It seems like it's always something that, you're going to be continually improving on. You're going to always expand on your knowledge. You're going to talk to other beekeepers. You're going to learn things from them. You're going to read books. But if your core is built around a sustainable model, and that's where I've always been, is I want them to be able to survive without me messing with them that much. And I'll tell you what, it's so much easier to do it that way than it is to try to, learn how to medicate and treat and do this and do that. And then you still have the frustration and financial loss that goes with it. That's so depressing. And I don't want people to experience that.
Well, we are definitely on the same page, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today, and it's been really great to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Solomon. I appreciate it. This is my first podcast, so I hope I have something even more interesting maybe next time, but at least you got the background of the Enjoy Beekeeping story.
Well, may there be many more.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you, treatment-free beekeepers, for joining me for another episode. It's been great to have you. Glad to make a new one for you. It's been a lot of fun. If you'd like to support the podcast, just a quick reminder, there is a Patreon page that you can support the podcast. That's found at patreon.com/TFB. And there's also, if you want some back information, if you're learning how to keep bees, you want to learn how to do that more, different methods, different things you can do, check out youtube.com/treatment-free-beekeepers. And of course, where you can talk to all of us, and we like to talk, and everybody likes to talk, and there's lots of talking going on. You can do that at facebook.com/groups/treatment-free-beekeepers. We have up to 37,000 members now. It's gotten pretty big. Now, not all of them post, of course, but, that's just how Facebook works. And if you like to talk but don't like Facebook, we also have a non-Facebook option, a regular old forum, and that's at tfbforum.com. I have been Solomon. I've been your guide for this treatment-free beekeeping experience today. And remember, have fun keeping bees, because if you're not having fun, do something else. We certainly don't need any more grumpy beekeepers.